Where do the Saints stand in the NFC South? Last week we talked about the Falcons making arguably the most shocking pick of the draft, choosing Michael Penix in the first round. And we also talked about like how the Saints have gotten better. But let's take a deeper dive into the NFC South and see where everybody else stands. Let's start off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Well, they won it last year. It's funny. I was digging through to confirm all these additions and losses, and I saw somebody gave them an A for their offseason heading into the draft, and I'm like, after they lost Devin White, they lost their offensive coordinator Dave Canales, who was so good for Baker Mayfield last year, lost Shaq Barrett, traded away Carlton Davis, Ryan Jensen retired. The only additions: Jordan Whitehead, Randy Gregory, Liam Cohen to replace Canales. I don't know how you give them an A for the offseason. This feels like a team that got worse to me. They could still win the division. They've won the division. We kind of underestimated them each of the last 2 years. I like the Graham Barton pick in the first round of the draft. I think he's going to be a really solid offensive lineman. But this doesn't feel like a team that got better. And the question surrounding Baker Mayfield, for him to lose the offensive coordinator that got so much out of him last year, this is a team that I don't really feel that much better about than the Saints necessarily.
The Bucs, like, why would we feel better about the Bucs than the Saints? I definitely don't. I mean, they lost their OC. I think that's going to be a massive hit for him. I think Baker Mayfield is going to get worse without him. I think losing Carlton Davis is a big deal. I don't think adding Liam Cohen is going to offset the loss of Dave Canales. Dave Canales has kind of proven to the point. I think Liam's got a lot to prove, has a lot of upside, but I don't feel good about him. I mean, I think I got them probably third in the division right now.
I mean, I'm going to have a hard time picking the Saints ahead of the Buccaneers because it's like fool me once, fool me twice, fool me three times with the way that team. And they did retain a lot of players too. I mean, they had a lot of talent to start with. But Devin White's one of the big. There's only one bigger loss on this entire list that we're going to get to than Devin White in the whole division. I
can't overlook what happened with the quarterback situation in Seattle. Baker plays better than he's ever played his whole entire life. I think Derek Carr, if he stays the same, I think the Saints are in that same area, and I think he's better than. I still think Derek Carr's a better quarterback than Baker. I think Baker just had the Matt Ryan-esque season where you're like, wow, this guy really could. And no, like he is probably what we thought he was. I think he got elevated a bit. So I don't know. Maybe Cohen finds a way to maintain it. But if I was betting on this, I would bet the under on everything on Baker if it's based on last year's numbers.
Under on everything on this team. Like if we're looking at them in a vacuum, I expect this to be a team that regresses because I think they overachieved last year, and I don't think they got better in the offseason.
Yeah, nobody was expecting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to win the division
and
last
a playoff
year,
game,
especially with the firepower that other teams have. But let's go to Atlanta Falcons. Let's check the Carfax on them, see where they're at, because they've had some notable additions to their team this offseason.
Well, you're right. Two notable additions that both play the same position. They got better because the only reason not the only reason, the main reason they didn't win the division last year is because they might have had the worst quarterback play in the entire league. Whether it was Desmond Ridder or Taylor Heineke, that was the one thing holding this team back all season long. They've been holding them back for a while. And they had Kirk Cousins, which is an obvious upgrade. If we weren't concerned about Kirk Cousins' health, we would say that's probably a bigger impact move than when the Saints brought in Derek Carr. I don't think Penix will probably play this year, but he's an upgrade as well. They improved that position. The rest of this list, they added Darnell Mooney. Okay, a little firepower to the offense, but it's more about getting more out of their recent first-round draft picks there. They added Rondale Moore. Nothing special there. Lost Jonnu Smith. That's a little bit of a hit, but not a big one. I mean, none of the key losses, key additions other than Kirk Cousins are game changers. But then, obviously, new head coach in Raheem Morris. And he brought in Zach Robinson to be his offensive coordinator, who's a guy we were eyeing for the Saints. So hopefully you would think they would be able to improve an offense that's been underachieving for a while for them. So I think everyone's going to pick them to win this division probably. I don't think it's a runaway, but I'll probably pick them to win the division too.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably have to take them as the top team in the division. If they had made a different draft pick at 8 and addressed something on their defense, I'd probably feel a little bit better about that prediction. But overall, I think that they're probably the team that looks most ready to hit the ground running. I think the one thing that they have on their side is just that it feels like there's optimism with them. You haven't really seen the underbelly or the disappointment of anything they did. I think the Saints, you did see the underbelly and the disappointment. So I think that kind of favors right now the feelings around the Falcons. But I don't necessarily feel that strongly about any of the top three teams or that poorly about any of the top three teams in this division. I mean, really the one that I think you end up feeling the best about is the one that, ends up being the team that's kind of like outside drinking out of the hose, so to speak. Like whichever team can survive off of hose water and shows the most character in tight games and can do the dirty, grimy things, I think is going to end up being the best team in the division. I don't know who that is yet. And, we got to see who looks the best in a dogfight. And whoever that ends up being, I think, is going to be the team that wins this division, because I don't think anyone's that strong enough to run away from everyone. They're going to have to fight their way out of here.
All right, now let's go to
survive their way out of here is probably the way to put it.
Oh, you got to make it happen. You got to if your mom ain't cooked the food, you got to find a way to eat.
Yeah.
Now let's go to the biggest unknown in the NFC South, which is the Carolina Panthers. They have a team that you don't know what they're going to look like. They have a new coach. It's Bryce Young's second year. You don't know what the defense is going to look like. So what are your thoughts on their roster, additions, losses, and draft picks?
Put your reading glasses on for this list. Wholesale changes, good and bad. Brian Burns is the guy I was referring to earlier, biggest loss of anyone, and they did not get a lot in return for him compared to what they could have if they had traded him a couple years ago. That was a big whiff for them. Frankie Louvu, Yetur Gross-Matos, Jeremy Chin, Dante Jackson, Shaq Griffin. Could have also put Von Bell on here. I mean, their defense is going to look totally different. Their key additions were all about Bryce Young. Guards, Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. They had to pay a ton for those guys at guard. Traded for receiver Deontay Johnson, and then some more defensive guys to offset the guys they lost. I don't see a team that got way better, but I do like that every decision they made, hiring Dave Canales, paying guards in free agency, it's all about trying to make Bryce Young work, and I think the offensive line was such a disaster last year that they can only improve. I don't see them in the mix with the top three that you were talking about, though.
Yeah, look, I think the thing here is, like, if Canales is able to elevate him a little bit, I think that makes him a little bit more formidable. But I think right now, if you're looking at these teams across the board, I mean, I think there's a four, and then there's kind of a clump of everyone in the same pack. And I don't necessarily see it with them. It's amazing to me how quickly they've kind of established themselves of having the worst owner in sports, not just the NFL, sports. I mean, dudes in the store yelling at people about their signs outside their restaurants and stuff. It's a mess right now. So maybe they find their way out of it. Canales might end up actually being a good hire. They might have stumbled their way into something there, and I think he might be. I think history tells us he's going to be really good for Bryce Young. I'm not totally sold on Bryce Young yet, though, either. I need to see a little bit more. I'm not saying he can't get there, but last year was a little bit stunningly bad at times, at least the exposures we had to him against the Saints. So, yeah, I think I got them as a clear number 4 in the division. It's
wild, and I didn't mention, I said Robert Hunt, Damian Lewis, Deontay Johnson, the top draft picks. They didn't have their first-rounder because of that trade, but late in the first round, they traded up a couple spots to get Xavier Legette, a good physical receiver. Then they go with a running back. I'm surprised they went running back because that feels like a luxury pick, and this team has so many holes. But the top 3 key free agent signings, the head coach, and the top 2 draft picks are all about giving Bryce Young more to work with, and their defense took a hit as a result, which was solid last year. But this is all about Bryce Young there.
Now that we've gone through all the teams, where do the Saints stand in all this? They've had additions. They've added Kubiak. They've added Chase Young. They've added Willie Gay and among others. We lost Michael Thomas, probably lost Andrews Pete, and probably lost Ramczyk, and we drafted Tali Fuaga. Where do we stand in all? Where do the Saints stand in all of this?
I don't know if they got better or not. No,
I got them second, I think, in the division.
Just in general, do I think the Saints got better or not, though? I don't think they got better this offseason. I think they could hold the line. I think they could look, the key addition was Clint Kubiak and his staff. Can Derek Carr hit the ground running more? Can they protect him early and not have the first 3 games be the disaster we were last year? But better, Chase Young has to be something special. I'm going to pick less wins for the Saints this year than I did last year. But they're in this mix. Like, if you're telling me to bet cash money on these teams and gave me the same over-under on all 3, I don't feel any better placing a bet on the other teams. But I'm not picking the Saints to win this division.
I don't think Chase Young has to be special. I mean, for them just to stay the same, like Chase Young, it could not play and they're the same on the D line. And I think Brian Brzee gets a little better, so they should be better on the D line. I think they'll be better at linebacker one way or another, whether it's an elevation of Pete Werner or Willie Gay pushes him a little bit. I think they get better there. I think their secondary is better with Kool-Aid. I mean,
if Marshawn plays.
If Kool-Aid wins the slot job, I mean, we all feel really high about Alontae Taylor's future, but he got benched twice last year. So if Kool-Aid takes that job and he's more solid, I think that's a benefit. I don't think losing Marcus May, no disrespect, I don't think it's a huge hit to the defense. Now, if they can block offensively, I mean, that's a huge thing. If they can't, it's a major liability, and I don't think the offensive coordinator matters. But if they find a way to be functional on the offensive line, I think Kubiak elevates him. I think he makes him better. I think it would be hard for him to be worse. I think there's a very real reality where everything kind of washes out and they stay the same.
Sure.
I don't know that I'm looking at a huge uptick, but I think it would be hard for them to be worse. And I really do truly believe that replacing Pete Carmichael is a huge deal.
No, it is.
And I don't want to just walk past that. If Fuaga's playing, Ramczyk kind of had an iffy year. So, I mean, if Fuaga's good and Uli Udo is at least Andrus Pete, and then that kind of washes out Penning, I don't know. I mean, I feel like they're going to at least be the same in some respect. I don't see the ingredients for a major drop-off. However, if injuries start striking, I don't like their depth in a lot of areas. They kind of went cheap in a lot of spots. There wasn't a huge kind of push behind a lot of areas. I don't know. I kind of feel like they're going to – I'd set whatever their over-under was last year. What was it, 8.5? I would probably leave it there going into the
that's
season.
the difference. I feel like the team can be the same as what it ended up being last year. Yeah. But I felt way better about the team going into last year. We had a healthy Michael Thomas. We had a healthy Ryan Ramczyk. Yeah. Those. That's what's gone now is what they were at the beginning of last year. So I'm more comparing it to what they ended up being last year. But they were a 9-win team last year.
I think that was the point I was making about the Falcons is that you're going into it kind of with that it's just all possibility and you haven't seen the bad. We've seen the bad. So I think even seeing the bad creates a pessimistic view almost going into the season where if they came into the season and it was they got Derek Carr and they got Clint Kubiak and we hadn't seen those things yet and it was kind of all this stuff coming together, you'd be oh man, they're gonna dominate this and this crappy division, and we've seen the underbelly. So I think it kind of even pulls back on the excitement of Kubiak a little bit. I'm sitting here and I'm but I think if the circumstances were changed a little bit, the ingredients are there for it to look like. I mean, they should take a step forward from last year, and if they don't, I really do kind of feel like it's a bit of a failure for real because they should be better than what it was with Pete Carmichael because, I really do believe DA is a great defensive coach. I think Kubiak's a better coach than Carmichael. You put those things together, it's just can you find a way to block? But I'm not willing to go out there and say it. 8.5, I think, is a good number for them going into the season.
The other thing, though, is we all agreed that last year they had probably the easiest schedule we've ever seen a team have. They're not going to have that luxury this year, so they could be just as good. And
they say statistically, this one's right. This one, I think I even seen that it was softer this year.
Oh my goodness!
So,
but no, I don't think the Saints necessarily got better, but I think just hitting the reset button. They underachieved last year.
The problem with the Saints now is that they are underachieving should be the expectation now. If we're looking at it to where they could be the same or exceed it, well, what we've seen the last 2 years tells us that they're going to find a way to underachieve. There's going to be a level of frustration, and then at the end of the season, they're going to start to figure it's going to be too late. So how do you figure it out week 1 instead of week 11 or whatever? And history tells us that's what it's going to be. There's going to be these ups and downs that shouldn't be endured. I think that there's a way to look at it and be well, through this prism, if they do all this, they should be better. But, there's nothing that we've seen the last 2 years that tells us that you should side on the side of, they'll figure that out. Got to see it now. So, I don't know. How y'all feel about 8.5? 8.5 feels to me, the number.
I would take under 8.5.
But that feels like where it should be set, I think. I think it's 8 or 9 is kind of where it ends up.
Yes, I agree. To an extent that we're talking about a team that should be somewhere between 7, 8, and 9 wins as what we would project. But Vegas numbers are always low because some teams the bottom drops out, the quarterback gets hurt.
Where they got them at?
I think they're 7.5 in Vegas.
7.5.
Yeah. So I think, but I think that's true of everyone. Even the teams you feel like are the best teams in the league usually come in at 10.5. Vegas makes their numbers add up too. When the reporters all add them up, you always end up 100 games over 500 because no one ever picks their team to be the team that goes 3-14.
Right.
And yet teams still go 3-14.
Right.
But Speaking of national perception, I mean, this leads right into the graphic from The Athletic today.
Yeah. The Athletic, they dropped a chart saying that the Saints were ranked 30th post-draft. So if we take a look at that.
That's just the perception surrounding this team is they've been a blah team, and they didn't do anything that anyone got excited. They didn't add a coach. They didn't add a quarterback.
Right.
They didn't add a blue chipper. They didn't add a Pro Bowl or an All-Pro or whatever.
Right.
And people have just been predicting the Saints' demise for years, and they've never done it. They've never been the 3-14 team. 7 is the worst they've ever done. I don't expect them to fall below 7 either. And yet this doesn't surprise me. I don't agree with it.
It surprises the hell out of me. 30th is insane.
Yeah.
30th is insane. They won 9 games last year. Putting them at 30th is insane. Like that's incredibly. Like there's a segment of Saints Twitter that I believe made this. Like that's insane.
How about Tampa Bay at 15? That's insane.
That's what I'm saying. This list is crazy. It's insane. Like even the separation
Chicago at 13.
Yeah, the separation between 15, 22, and 30 is nuts to me. Chicago being that high after being the worst team in the league.
The Patriots
is
at
nuts
24.
Minnesota doesn't even have a proven quarterback.
It's just a bad list.
Yeah, it's a bad list. It's an insane list. I'm not putting the Saints like in one of the top two lines here. It goes 1 to 8 is on the top line, 9 to 16 is the next line. I think they're somewhere in that 17 to 24 range, though. Like 30th is crazy.
They
C-tier.
feel like what were we gonna say?
C tier. Yeah.
Yeah. They feel like Pittsburgh to me. They feel like Atlanta and Tampa to me. They feel like I'm not putting the Giants ahead of them. I'm definitely not putting the Commanders ahead of them. I mean, there's a lot of mediocrity on this list.
The Jets, I guess they got Rodgers.
Yeah. I mean,
But you don't know what he's going to look like after that injury.
Minnesota at 20. That's a lot of blind
how
faith
is
on
New England
Minnesota.
at 24?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Chicago at 13.
The Commanders are at 23 and the Saints are at 30.
Yeah.
Like why?
Yeah.
Why?
But that is the perception. So when I was going through all that additions, subtractions, universally the Saints offseason D plus D.
Yeah.
They're just sitting there doing their cap stuff. Like that's just how people feel about this team. People see a mid coach, a mid quarterback, and they didn't see anything to change their.
I mean, they did have
team.
I'll give everybody that. Like the offseason is incredibly. It's just a lot of replacement level players. Now if Chase Young hits, like I think that's a great offseason. Really, I mean that's kind of what they need. But yeah, they didn't go out. They didn't spend. They kind of stayed the same. Within the context of the team, though, like I don't think it's a D offset. Like I think within the context of the team and the vision, I think they did what they were supposed to do. I think if they went out and spent a ton of money and tried to go for it, I would be much more critical because it just does not feel like that's where they should exist. So I actually like what they did this offseason, and if it's a sacrifice of this season in some degrees to have like a better next season, I actually like it because I don't think you should be trying. If they win 7 or they win 9, like there's really no difference. If they win 6 and they win, 9, there's really no difference to me. I think, if you're sub playoffs or fighting to get in and losing in the first round, there's really no difference to me. I think you just have to try to remain competitive so you don't erode your locker room, your culture, all that stuff. And I think they've done enough to not do that. I think they're still going to be competitive. I don't feel like the players feel like the front office has quit on them. I think they've done enough to try to maintain that. And I think if you do that and you aren't going too far for this team where they're at, I think that was the best approach, honestly.
No,
I'm not trying to just rally for what they did.
I like their offseason approach for that reason. They didn't mortgage the future. They didn't spend a lot of money on anyone who's only going to help this year. They didn't trade away future draft picks. They're actually catching up on the salary cap a little bit. I like all that stuff. I just don't think, you sacrificed improving on that. I think they held the line this offseason, and they'll be about the same product that they've put out there the last 2 years with a chance to have better results.
I think Clint Kubiak is a massive addition. I think the whole offensive staff is a massive addition. We'll see what it is. We'll see how it shakes out. But, I mean, as far as their offseason goes, getting him, I think, is huge. And, look, there's, like, an alternate reality where, like, what if DA started out with, like, a good offensive staff? Like, what would it be? I mean, I think there's a reality where things look a lot different.